Yeah, there we go. Problem solved. So now that we're going live, the other thing is that they don't give the link for sharing it very easily. Either it's buried on some other page instead of here. That's great too. More UX fail from Google. Oh no, there it is. They hit it in the top right corner. Okay, good. So here we go. Twitter. No.
Hello.
Hello.
Um, Hi all. I'm completely new here. I've registered for previous meetups, but I never came for any of the events. So this is my first event.
Okay.
Should I be on the Zoom call or should I be on the YouTube video
No, you
stream?
can be on the Zoom call. That's fine. You can listen in, and if I ask for participation, you can participate or just listen in on the Zoom. The only difference is I only have one camera, so I decided to dedicate it to the YouTube channel so that people can see that, and it's an easier recording. Um, and so yeah, that's up to you, your choice. Um,
Okay, if someone is sharing their screen, would it be accessible on YouTube or
yeah,
right
it,
now on?
it would be here. I do have so what I share is generally on YouTube, but I should do it on here too. So I'm kind of just showing the diagram on YouTube. You're right. I should share it here too. And share the screen, but generally when we're discussing things, it's not that important. But I will share the screen eventually as we
Sure.
start. So I think the Zoom is better personally because you're going to be live. If I ask something, the YouTube has a delay, and there you can only type questions in the live chat. I do check them, so if you feel more comfortable like that, because it's easier. A lot of people have YouTube set up, and they're used to watching on YouTube, so that's fine. That would work. But yeah. All right.
Earlier, there were references to a diagram where you were pointing out that the
Oh
yellow
yeah, it
line
is.
going.
I can share that quickly. It's just a standard event model that I have on behind me,
Okay.
which is this.
Also, is this a continuation series? Like, is it possible to come in between and understand what
Yeah, I
the?
mean it's a continuation for almost a year now. We evolved from developing a time tracking application as an example application, and yeah, I don't expect you to watch a year's worth of these before starting. So um, we cover we always rehash and revisit the basics all the time. So you shouldn't feel too lost after a couple of times of joining. I think you'll understand the concepts fairly quickly. I don't think you
Okay,
should
that's
be,
helpful. Yeah.
yeah. But I do encourage you to look at some of the previous recordings. I did put more focus on specific topics at different times, and so those are published as more formal videos. Well, that's a loose term, formal. It's whatever I could edit together quickly myself, but you can probably see some concentrated topics. But the live recordings are mostly for people that want to catch up on a meetup they missed. Like if this topic was interesting for someone and they had to go because they're not a different time zone and it's dinner time or whatever, they can always just replay the recording to catch up on everything else that was discussed. So that's everyone's asking to make sure that these are recorded. So I'm just live streaming them to not make a lot of work for myself because editing videos takes a long time. So hopefully that works for everyone. If someone wants to download the YouTube videos and edit them for me, by all means, I'd be very happy about that. Okay, so let me change my scene here for a second. That's my stream. That's how YouTube looks. And in the meantime, I can use my other one here. Oops, stop the sharing for a second here. And let's go over to this Twitter. Starting. Okay, and we're live on YouTube as well. I should just say that without a link, because in my profile I have the link to the YouTube channel, so don't forget to subscribe not to miss out next time. This is how the sausage is made. These meetups are a good percentage of them is you witnessing me manage or mismanage my YouTube channel. Alright, so that's that. Tweet that out. That's good enough. And now we can go back to our event model and switch to the other one. There we go. I should really start to work on these shortcuts too for scene selection. I'm not a professional YouTuber, so my apologies if this is not very polished. Just trying to get the content out. All right. So, any questions from the previous session that we had on tombstoning? First of all, for people that were here. Let's see if I can zoom out.
I had to watch it about 3 times to get my head around everything you guys were talking about.
Yeah, we had last time, I think, with Rick, I had to drop off early, and Rick and Einar continued, and it got into some interesting areas here, and Rick is very thorough in his notes, as you can see. So I came back actually after I had my meeting, and they were still at it, so it's got a long recording. I don't know. I don't think we live streamed it though. Yeah, unfortunately.
And Adam, I still don't have access. It said it was going to send you a request that was going to request access.
Really? Interesting. Okay, let me see if I can just get the share here. Copy link board. Maybe it's an outdated one. Oh, I know. Maybe it is outdated. Oh boy. Because we did change it. I had to try that. I just put it in chat.
Okay.
Because we had to switch. I think
Yep.
Alex Gemmel was the one that owned the board before, and it was costing him money, so I paid him back for all his hosting costs, and he transferred it to me so I could. I totally forgot for a while that he had it, that it was his ownership, because I have a million Miro boards that I use from all the work that we do, and yeah, I don't know. I've lost count of how many Miro boards I have. Let's just see on here. Yeah, you can see there's quite a lot of them. Yeah, it's getting expensive, and I don't like the fact that it's away from the source control, which is why we're going to cover that topic, because I really want an event model to be version controlled alongside the actual code, much like I wish that Jira tickets and other things were stored alongside the code, not have some other type of technology, other database. So, that's valuable information. What state are all the tickets in while you're working on some feature. The correlating of other systems together is just kind of a real immature way of going about it. So I don't want event modeling to be yet another thing you got to manage on the side with some other system like Miro. I need it to be, using some sort of, was it Pummel and some other UML kind of notations, or just straight JSON. This is what Bobby and I are always thinking about, and it's time for me to kind of start the process of getting a common standard for event models, so that so that we have something that can go into the root folder, root directory of your project, of your repositories, and there, as you change it, you can see how features are done. Maybe embed some relative links, and depending on what kind of presentation tool you're going to use for that, should be able to get you to the right code. So if you can imagine going to a read model of something, you should be able to right click on it and say, take me to those event handlers for that read model. That should be one of those things, and that you quickly navigate. Same thing with a command handler. You should be able just to click on them and go straight to that implementation. That's what we're after. But underneath, I think Simon Wardley did that with Wardley Maps Online. He had kind of a DSL. It's a little bit more complicated because it has the actual space as being like the positioning of each item is very important in Wordly maps. That's what makes it a map. He continues to use that argument that there's a big difference between a graph and a map. I think event models can be both. You can start to express more things in those, but you have the more important aspect of them is what is connected to what to keep the flow from left to right. And as I said at the beginning, the pattern of event to read model, then to the UI automation or whatever, then back through command, event, read model. See, they left out a read model here. This is not a good diagram. So I wish I was there at the last meetup because they missed a step here. So yeah, that's something that we probably need to adjust. But anyway, this opinion of what's connected to what drives by convention the move forward through time, and therefore just by saying what's connected to what, you get the structure, the implied structure. So therefore the graph should be simpler. So if we look at that convention, maybe I can pull that up at some over here. Let me see if I can do that. That'd be kind of cool to see. Wordly Maps Online. He provides an example one, but I'm thinking of doing the same thing. So they're online Wordly maps, right? And then example map. So I think this is open source, and they have a visual code extension. But let me just see if I can share that here. I think I have it with scene. Yeah, then I should have scene with you guys on the screen. So if I copy this, sorry, OBS issues here. Zoom, copy, scene, duplicate, scene with zoom. I had this going before, just don't have it anymore. Scene with zoom, and then paste that here, paste reference. Shrink it down. I'm glad I actually took the time to watch some OBS videos on YouTube, like how to use it, and it's become a lot easier. Read the damn manual, Adam. Maybe things will be easier for you. All right. So here we are. So yeah, this interesting part here is what I'm talking about. The convention that he has a lot of this positioning and stuff. See if I can zoom in. So you can see how I should be sharing on this screen too. Pardon me. Share screen. Share screen. This here. Okay, there. Yeah, I don't want you guys to have to flip to YouTube to see it. So this is what I'm talking about here at the top. So there's component, you give it a name, you have coordinates as to where they are, and all that, and you can see how it, kind of places it on this map. The same thing can be done for event models, but you don't have XY coordinates. You have relationships kind of dictating where they are. So such as instead of component, you would have 3 different things at least. You'd have a command, an event, and a read model, and then you would probably have some things for the UI in a similar fashion. So that's kind of what we're thinking. And then there's these notes and annotations. That's easy to do as well. The thing about an event model that makes it different from this, it's kind of difficult to do it on a Wordly map because it's a map which is a superset of a graph, which would give you kind of interesting conflicts if someone was editing a different part of the map, and there was a potential link between them, which you do here. As you can see, the little arrows are the evolution of things, how things are moving from left to right. If you remember anything that we talked about in Wordly, about Wordly maps. So anyway, I hope that makes sense, that we have a little bit of an easier time. And the important point I wanted to make in this is that that we have a timeline. So when there's a change in a part of the event model, you're generally looking at a specific part of the timeline, which would imply, like in this case, this this markup would be, if we did it in a timeline-like way, our conflicts and changes should actually not be so many if different groups of people are working on different parts of the event model, which would make it easier to merge efforts. Whereas I think in this case, there is no structure for that. At least not there might be some top down on this little area here where it says public to cup of tea, and it's kind of top down for dependencies. But you can see that it can branch out quite quickly to lots of different things. Any thoughts on that? Because we can have this top-down way of talking about our timeline in an event model, and at least the references won't be as many because we isolate by parts of the workflow. Anyway, just some thoughts. So in an event model, it kind of looks like this. Stop share here. There you go. Yeah, so that's what we're going to look at after. But first, let's walk through what we did last time, which was the confusing thing. Like, I think I got into some really hectic stuff. I forget exactly what it was, but it was way overkill, and I forget the reason that I think Rick went down this road of making it super complicated, adding these sequence numbers to the actual tombstones as well, which was overcomplicating things. And oh, I know what it was. So he was thinking about, if tombstoning happens naturally, which is, to people that don't know what that is, it's closing of the books, accounting style, which means you, unlike traditional event sourcing applications where you have a stream of events that can go on forever, if you, as an example, if you have your checkout cart on the website and you keep coming back to the website but you never buy anything, your order can accumulate thousands of events over a couple of years. So every time that you go to the site to get the state of your cart, this purest event sourcing application, every time you add something to your cart, the application needs to go and look at the history of all events that happened to your cart, apply all the state changes that those events implied, and then try to do your command, which would be like add another item or something. And that would have probably gone through some validation logic that, hey, you have too many items in your cart, sorry, take some out before you continue. So that's kind of bad because you're dragging in events from really, really long time ago, and that's not how accounting works. Accountants close what's called close the books. They do closing of the books, which means banks might close it at the end of the month for your personal banking. Trading systems might close the books at the end of the trading day and move to other things like reconciliation and other processes after the trading day is done. So closing of the books in terms of accounting is very important. With taxes, it's years, so you can find different examples of closing of the books. The same principle should be applied to information systems generally. That's my opinion, anyway. Since we need to lower the burden of what it is to run the system online, and over the last 3-4 sessions, we've been referring to this other diagram, which we're quite familiar with for successful blue-green deploys, which means that your online data is tiny. 300 megabytes is kind of your online data for your current version. You have archive data and other slower places where you store things. But as you go from version 1 to version 3, you're really making sure that this 300 megabytes is all you're moving over, not something really huge. This allows you to have a blue-green deploy that happens within seconds, new versions, or spinning up new instances in a cluster for some reason when you're scaling out. So the less you have to carry, the faster it is. But if you show this against what traditional event sourcing has been, then you notice that we have quite a lot of problems there with the way things are usually. So I hope that sort of makes sense, because we had one problem where this blue-green division of old data was really causing a replay to be quite long, 2 days for one system. So that's not a good blue-green deploy. So yeah, when we go back here to what it is, why we're doing this, we close the books maybe automatically at the end of the month. Let's say we're going to start a new month, and whatever happened to your shopping cart, we're going to close it down and start a new one here. So that means I don't need to look at the old events for the cart. I just need to look at the newer events for the cart, and this initial sort of tombstone. That's what it's called, tombstoning, this tombstone. This is what we kind of had as the projection of everything that's happened in there before. So we don't have to replay all these historic events. That's what keeps the history low. So that, I hope, shows what tombstoning is. And then back to what Rick was saying, and this complicated piece of it here, which isn't necessary in my opinion, because he's looking at the problem of when tombstoning occurs at the end of the day or at the end of the month, what if at that same time you're deploying a fix? You might have the natural tombstone come in before or after the one that you're doing to fix a problem, especially when it comes to projections and aggregating a lot of different data across a lot of orders, for example, like some enforcement rule for can't have more than $1,000 of outstanding orders across all orders. So this sequence as to where your tombstone to fix the problem came in, did it manage to get in just before this automatic one ran at midnight, or after? And my idea is that this is a little unnecessarily complicated. You should know, and it should be part of your event model, as to when your tombstoning happens. Was it at the end of the month? Is it a slow rollout of these tombstones on the last day of the month? Is it done at night, at low peak? How are the different methods that you can kind of do this tombstoning process? Is it on demand during those times? Who knows? But you should be aware of the day that's happening, or the situation that's happening, and probably, not to say that you shouldn't deploy a fix then, but to be aware if there's going to be any consequences, to understand what type of fix you're doing, that it might impact the fix. And so I think last time we got to the point where if you even if you happen to pick a time when this natural tombstone occurred, and you did try to upgrade your read model and the bug is still there, some data is off, just reapplying the bug fix or rolling over the forcing a tombstone will fix it. So that's why we went back to this easier model of not having all these sequence numbers that are embedded trying to sequence the tombstones themselves when we close the books on a particular piece of information. So that's a lot to think of right there, and take a look at the previous recordings on the channel to understand that in depth, because we don't need this complexity. I don't think that's up here that they went down the these basically event sourcing for the tombstones themselves. I think it's a little bit overkill. As you can see, it's a lot more complex than this one here. Yeah, so the last piece, I think Rick added, the read model is not about to be tombstoned, is when you make a correction or deploy a bug fix for that tombstone. All right, so let's get to an even easier topic, which is lookup tombstones. And that's an opposite of something between these two things. So let's go back to what the regular tombstone is for an entity, such as a basket. We have, and that's the difference between snapshots and tombstones. So if you've done event sourcing in CQRS, you'll be familiar with snapshots, which is just adding some quicker way to calculate without having to go back, but it's done on an infrastructure level. Tombstones are closer to business level processes that we close the books and start with a new small stream every time, and I put them in different rows to say that it, generally would have a different ID. You can embed that information in these events if you want, to make it easier to trace through how you got there. But in terms of operating the, just the operations of the system, all you need is the last little bit here. Snapshots do that on the more of an infrastructure level. So that's what we got through. So this is a snapshot and a tombstone of the actual entity itself, such as an order. And then we went to the most complex case, which is a read model for something like outstanding value of all open orders. So, and I think we had a product discount or something instead, but that works too. So these read models now have an update from everything before. We try to make sure that they're done only through these tombstones whenever they can, but there's an idea that you need that tombstone for the actual read model itself, and that's complicated. And so something that's in between these two is a read model that doesn't do any aggregation across a ton of other entities. Well, actually, it's just one entity per row, for example. So it may look at everything, but it's not going to need to bind the information from one order with another, such as a total outstanding amount. It would be something like a lookup. Lookup is probably the easiest example, so we can start to draw that below here. Oops. Actually, I'm going to make sure we have enough space. So yeah, I think we'll take this example here and rework it for that. So I'll copy all of this. We're copying our ever-growing Miro board here. And how do we change that to reflect that it's a lookup? So we'll call this, instead of a buying incentive, that's going to be a order amount lookup. And of course, it's going to have a structure such as order 123 is currently at $100, and order 124 is at $50. So this read model would be used to kind of show your current balance in your read model, or in your basket or something on your site. You would filter by your order number, and maybe user as well, who it belongs to. So user ID, just put in Joe. And yeah, the reason I'm including that as read model is usually denormalize data, which means they add all necessary data that you want to be able to just query one read model to show what you need on the screen. Joe and Mary. Right, so these this is the type of data that we want. In here, I'm just going to copy it. I'm going to keep editing it after. It's not buying incentives. These are the complex things we were talking about. I'm just pasting the text because it's easier than rerouting all those arrows after. So don't want to delete the actual rectangle. But essentially what's happening here, let's give it a name, title here, so we know what we're talking about. And this would be Lookup. Blue green deploys. So the idea here is that you have a high affinity for really what this thing is and its rows to actually be affiliated with a specific order. So you can see that there's a correlation that we're expanding and making some lookup data, most likely the price or something else for that order in here. So that's interesting because this read model now is really a set of independent rows. If you're using a SQL backend, traditional relational database, that means you don't need a complicated strategy of how to coordinate what we see above here. You can treat the update of each row and how it changes with a particular order independent from the other. What does that mean? Well, that means you don't have to worry about a tombstone across the whole thing. You could have more data in here for version 1 versus v2. So that's Mary, not Mare. V2. So as you're deploying, you can see that certain parts of this read model have been moved forward. So the other interesting part about this is you can get processors that kind of do this per row, and maybe that can be scattered across. You don't want to kill your system, so you might want to go and do a select from where v equals 1 and then slowly upgrade them so it doesn't really take your system offline or whatever. The other interesting thing is if you need a new version of this, like perhaps this switch from version 1 to v2 is because of a bug, you can also do it on demand. So it doesn't have to be a process here, but it can also be something that takes in the initial kind of I don't want the command actually. So whether it's that or a screen. I don't want a product list, but let's say I want to, add to cart, and I need to look up something, then I can kick this same process off using that. So if I have this process updating things as a command, to update the lookup for v2 of the logic. So if we do this automatically, as I said, for this, you can also do it on demand, so that when you've actually added to cart, you know, this is not indicative of the UI you would have, but in the back end, it's kind of like what's happening anyway. So cart items, you know, you've gone through this process, so you're getting a v2 here. And so you could say shows adjusted prices or totals, adjusted total, something like that. So yeah, there's option 1 and option 2. I think we can have these fixes going through in parallel. As you know, we've said, hey, we have everyone's cart is miscalculated by $1 because of whatever. I had a typo in the logic or misunderstanding of the requirements. Whatever the reason, anyone that goes to our site is going to have an error in the amount that they have in their cart, and that's not good. But some interesting caveats here, as opposed to what we were talking about last week and the previous weeks, is that this is, again, highly divisible, that for all the people that are not using the site right now, who cares? You don't need to update it. They're not on the site. You're not going to affect business. You might, you know, have some reports that are off by a few dollars right now, but for everything else, for the actual core of supporting your users that want to buy things, you don't have to worry about the users that are not online. So if you have, you know, 1% of your user base online, you know, on average, you can see that rolling these out slowly to adjust that, mixed in with the on-demand kickoff for the update, would work quite well. And that option did not exist last week when this read model was a calculation across all entities. There you had a problem. Like, for example, if your discount is based on the amount of outstanding orders across your entire company, or the amount of sales so far over the last 2 months with some weighted averages, that's not where you can employ this strategy to adjust these lookups. So that's the main goal of today, is to discuss this type of change for fixing bugs and getting new versions of read models. So any questions or any other ideas that people want to throw out there? You must have been thinking of something as I was talking about this. Nope. Okay. That's fine. Yeah, so I guess the next part is just to draw out how that would look on the timeline. I think it's a lot. Maybe I'll just leave it for everyone to help and contribute to how you would adjust this diagram to be changed to accommodate this type of read model instead of the one above, and how you could show the many more possibilities that you have when you combine this affinity to each order, combined with the fact that each order's tombstone now plays a big part in updating this. Whereas in the previous example, we never had that ability, right? So that's the end of that. So if there's no questions on this, we can move forward onto the event model topic, which is going to that standard of encoding our event models. So I'll move up to the top part here, where we have our time tracking example. I think the complex part obviously is going to be these wireframes. I think Bobby's actually working on some embedding of Figma and other standard tools, which is going to help adoption. But I know for myself, I want to see some non-vendor dependent ways of adding wireframes to what's going on, or perhaps if you have some really neat frameworks for your front end, like React-like things, that you could use them to generate and link to the actual screens here. So that's definitely out of the scope of what we can do here in our meetup, but in terms of having an event model system that's fully integrated with your project, that's kind of the holy grail, is that, you know, changing things here is going to change the way your UI looks in the actual application. I don't think we're far from there. I think we have some interesting concepts here where you have a lot of example wireframes of how the whole thing's supposed to behave with the case of the UI. If you think of showing and expanding and contracting a drop down or something, you can get into that level of specs if you want, which would be kind of interesting. So, all right, going back to kind of a DSL for this, I think before, when we tried to do any kind of DSL for event systems, we had heavily relied on the fact that we're going to have an event sourced CKRS system. I think we can drop that requirement now and use the event model as an agnostic way of expressing state and screen transitions throughout over time. Let's see if we can work on that. I might do a live coding session tomorrow on Saturday, just to play around with some front end automation. We can have a text box showing kind of like what Wordly Maps is, or maybe we can fork the Wordly Maps online and trim it down to kind of be used for event models. Maybe that'll be a good way to bootstrap ourselves to something quick, unless there's some stuff we don't want in there, but I haven't had a chance to look at the code on that yet, so maybe that's what we'll do on Saturday if we have a chance. So let's see what we can come up with here for actually I'll probably use a simpler one up here as an example, like this one here. This to-do list is a good example because it's got a fairly simple structure, so we could probably evolve what we do in our encoding from this simple example of starting off with a empty application, doing some command, updating the UI, etc. So everyone can follow how we use this to actually do that. We probably won't need these extra helper events about physically entering and doing things in the store, but just look at these simple events down here, and this one read model that it uses for the state of the board to show how that would be. And I think if I start typing up here in a much smaller font, okay, so event model markup, and so
Adam, Adam,
yes,
would this be then somehow slice based?
yes, and well,
or
yes,
tick, I mean, yeah.
It depends on yes, I think so. I just not sure if we want the word slice in here, because slice is kind of a
tick
conceptual
or something.
Well, I don't know. Slice is something that we use conceptually to give a unit of work for when we're implementing the system. I guess it's used in other areas too, like when we're talking to business about a specific state transition. Talk about the slice that's in question. But in reality, what we're doing here is, state changes and state views. And if maybe we can rename things later, but if we just capture this in a similar manner that Wordly Maps has come up with their ways to elaborate the graph, I think we might be able to move to something that we can version control very quickly. I'm pretty sure you can write a translator of what we're going to come up with here to do something even on Miro. But anyway, not that I want to move away from that. I think ONote is going to give us way cheaper collaboration. Like Miro is costing us a lot per year in licensing because every single client has been using it for a number of years now, and it's in the thousands of dollars per year. I'm not joking. That's too much. So it's nice and it works, but it's not the best fit either for exactly what we're doing. It's because this is more of a map, because position matters more than what we're looking for, which is a graph. So we don't need to pay for all these extra things, right? The one thing where we do need some positional stuff is the UI mockups. If not the real ones, but I think that's where you can put in integrations with other things, or use an extension for maintaining that yourself in this language as well. So what would that look like, that markup? We can kind of borrow from what's out there already, and we could say screen, which would have some things like a name, my to-do list. Not sure if we want to embed IDs, but one of the things that we can see right now is that we have instances of let's make this a little smaller, just way too, make that bold. Screen 1, bad ID. I should probably call it something else. Screen tasks, I guess, we only have that. There we would have name my to-do list. Then we would have a component that would be perhaps a list box with the name to do. So that's what we do, and then we have another component in there, box to do, and then we would have a component, and this would be, gosh, I hate this formatting stuff that always pops up. How do you make that go away? Whatever. Very annoying. Okay, list box, then we have text or input. I don't know, text box, I guess. New item. And then we would have a component. Button. Add new item. That's that. Okay, so that's the core of it.
Shouldn't this second one be list box done?
Oh, right, yes, of course. Oops. Hit the wrong key. Okay, let's see here. Hopefully that didn't screw up the screen cast. Come on, wake up, wake up. I think I crashed Miro. No, I didn't.
Sharing stopped.
Yep. I saw that. It's still okay for that one. Should be back now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so not to do, but done. So here's the thing. We have a definition of a screen that we may use lots of times. And so then we have screen instance, for example. Of tasks, where we can say to do is empty, done is empty, screen instance task 1. So maybe, yeah, we'll figure out a convention. And the thing that compared to other formats, I don't want it to be easy for us to write what is what the image is right now. I want it to be friendly for parallel development. So that's why we're starting to go off this. Let's fill out the details later, but let's look at, you know, we would want something like this, and then we would have screen instance tasks 2. Then we would have command or component, no, screen, no, command. Let's put a command in there. Add task. Then we would have screen. Then we would have event task added. And then we would have read model tasks, something like that. I can probably change this, right, to my tasks. I think we were talking about this with Rick the other time. Names. Yeah, the screen is called to-do list, but internally we have tasks. An item will be task. Okay, so read model tasks. These are going to need the actual data in them but we can start to see that we're starting to follow this sine wave. It'll be interesting when we evolve it to have overlapping sine waves and of the input-output way we're doing things. And then, so once we have that, we have a screen instance tasks, and it's number 3. I'm wondering if these numbers are even necessary, because again we have that ordering in here, but maybe if we're referring to them further on, I'll leave them in for now. We'll see. So that's kind of starting to take shape a bit. Any ideas so far? Maybe we'll do an actual. So screen tasks 1. Do we just assume they're empty if we don't have anything in there? Button, add new task, new tasks. Maybe we need the text in there. It's kind of like making a markdown or like programming an actual UI. If you remember all the different ways programmatically you could describe that, but this is taking it to a next level to actually have the example data in there and link it all together.
So you can only have something inside if you have a read model before it.
That's true. So do we have or do we make that implied that it will have no information, therefore it's as if it gets a null result? Or do we have, I mean, we could say that this application has a default value of sample task, like buy bread, and that gets you going by being able to say, you know, complete the task or whatever. You know, it's really up to us. I think we could do both. I think we might want to make it as forgiving as possible and just allow whatever tooling we have in and around a simple convention to then imply, you know, what it means that we, yes, the fact that we have read model tasks here being used for this screen instance implies that this read model all read models exist from the very beginning, but it's only at this point in the language that we have the definition of that link, because if we were actually to do a very complete, thorough one, we would have like a default we would have it blank with nothing, and that's what's driving these screens right now, right? But I'm thinking that that's implied. I could have this, but at the same time, is it really giving me value to have another one here? Unless I have something non-trivial in the default data for this read model, is it really giving me much value? And so,
is the read model also going to be like some kind of with some definition, that you can reuse?
I think so. Yeah, it's going to have the same problem. Yeah, it's going to have.
So you would define it at the beginning.
Yeah,
once,
I think so. I think you're right. I think we would have a read model here. Or I mean, here's the thing about collaboration on these things and why I'm not getting a traditional structure of like a program at the top, all the definitions and all that, like a C program with all the imports and all that. Maybe the read model is implied. I don't know. Could the screens be implied? Do I just do this definition the first time that I use it, and then I just say, oh, repeat this previous screen later? It seems a little redundant here, right? Like this definition is really kind of, all the stuff is empty anyway. That is my instance, my first instance. And the other reason that I'm worried about putting things up there is for conflict resolutions. If I start to just define things or let them be implied where they're being used, when it comes time to merge efforts, you're going to have an easier time with conflict resolution. I'm also thinking that, does this have to be a single file? Do we want to have, is there any advantage on breaking this up into multiple files? No one said that this has to be one single file to define an event model, especially if we have content tracking in Git, allowing you to basically follow where functions are defined. Well, what about here when we have a definition, or at least an implied definition of a read model that's used somewhere else? Do we have a separate file per workflow as we go across? That probably makes sense, but do we stop at that? Do we have a separate file for each event stream? Do we have a separate file for the middle of the event model, which is the glue between the UI and all the various pieces underneath, where all the blue and green boxes live? Do we have that as our I guess API? I don't know what you would call the middle layer, or interaction layer, and would that make it easier if those things were in 3 separate files? You have your UI file, you have your interaction file, and you have your systems files for all the swim lanes. That might, if you're editing this thing by hand, then that would probably be bad, because you'd be flying through so many different files to do it by hand. But that's not the purpose of this. The purpose is not to do what I'm doing here, type it up. The purpose is to have a structure that allows us to manipulate things graphically like we've always done, but allow the manipulation by multiple people to be coordinated effortlessly. And so just because most other things are, one file describes your entire graph or whatever, okay, maybe that one file is a zip file with a few of these things flying around in there. There's a few formats out there that don't necessarily force everything into one file, right? You have your SVGs, that's one graphic, one file. Okay, that makes sense. But there's other things where where if you look at that particular document artifact, you can, a lot of them you can open up with gzip or whatever. It's actually an archive. So maybe that's something where we could discuss about how we decompose this, and if we look at how we actually do an event modeling session when people are starting out, maybe just brainstorming all of these, right? That would be, that would evolve. If you're doing this over time, actually that's a much more interesting thing to talk about. So if we have, well, let's just do this then. So if we start with, the brainstorming part of event modeling, maybe doing some wordly maps with them as well. That's stage 1, and that can be just our overall system, right? So that we would have, let's assume we have multiple files. So at this case, we're going to be storing everything in system 1. And that's the file that we have to store this stage. The next thing, we're just going to follow the 7 steps in event modeling. So the next step would be doing all the UIs, right? So that's just UIs. Maybe I should just delete these. Just call them UIs. So, oh, actually the second step was easy because we just organized these. So, okay. So if we have this randomness, do we need XY coordinates to store it? Maybe that's an annotation. Maybe we do that as positioning. Maybe we have a second one that we don't use later, that we throw away, and that would be positioning annotation. And so we have 2 files. And I don't think it has to refer to anything. I think it refers to all of them or any of them. So just do that. And the second step is to put these in order, which means this is still in play. So we get the timeline going at this point. Let's see this. So get the timeline going. This is the second one. So this gets updated too. So we possibly have 2 files, and we're keeping it separately because now where these things are horizontally matters, because they kind of start to play into what we had in this example up here. So the next part would be screens. So would copy this over, and our next part would be UI, UI1. Oh, sorry, I forgot about this. This still exists, obviously. We copy this. Should have just copied the whole thing because it's actually built up on this. And this is where we start to, do this stuff here. Reuse this guy. So this is where we start to say, this is the stuff that people see across the time. And so we start to do this. The contents of this may still be positioning. But I think I got running out of room here. Let me just move this over. So this is just a rough top of my head kind of thinking out loud as to where we would put all this information and when we can drop the positioning importance. You know, how far can we push that back? So this is the next step where we're organizing things into systems. And this is where yeah, I think that's the next step. Okay. So UI 1, but now we have system 1 and system 2, because we're starting to organize things along swim lanes. So yeah, I have a inventory system and a payment system. Okay, that's what's happening here. And then the next part is organizing the different UIs. Oops. Into the different actors. Again, I've totally lost track of the fact this is the task thing, but I just want to show all kind of like where things would go. So we're switching domains midway here. Guest. So I have 2 users that are using it, and so, you know, do we now have, you know, something better such as UI manager? And UI guest. And I think that's kind of like how far I want to go. I might actually rename these to be inventory and payment.
So you have an inventory of guests?
Maybe rooms. The hotel, back to the hotel example.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. I'm just making stuff up right now because I'm more interested about the format of this than the actual event model example, just for the structure. Whatever, that's fine. And I think this is the point where we drop this because we have enough references to these, and I think you would have some implied, I think even here, I think we can drop positioning from this place because we can assume that if we have an event model imagined as a grid or a bunch of cells in Excel, that there would be an implied correlation as to where these are physically, that they are now linked, and we can store that somewhere. I guess the problem with dividing it up into too many files, now you have to make a decision as to, you know, do you put the reference into the UI explanation or do you put it in the opposite, right? I think in this case it makes sense for it to be in the UI. But yeah, so 4 files so far for this. Not sure if that's going to help or not. What are your thoughts of you know, I mean, this is a little bit clearer to look at, to see where everything lives and it flows. But you kind of have, in this case, you have to merge all of these into that one workflow. But because as you're working on these things and changing things, it might be easier. Maybe it's not good to split the UI. Maybe we keep it as, because if we move events up or down, or if we move UIs up or down, that should be kept together in the same file to make that move more obvious. So, you know, maybe this is just UI. You know, so I'm just going to copy all this for posterity. You know, versus having just UI and just system right now.
So the requirement is to be able to have this as files.
Yes, well, to store your diagram
Git
as
that you
a
can,
yes, exactly.
because it's different if it's going to be in a server, you know, online, and then people are going to use it, or it's going to be.
Well, I mean, I'm drawing these in Miro right now, and I can export it to some weird format, I think. But to import it and to take the history, you know, for what Bobby's doing with ONote is he's making sure that the history travels. In fact, is looking at Git to be the you know, part of the actual type of format for an ONote diagram, so that you have the history traveling with you as to who did what. And that might, you know, that's good. I'm just wondering if the actual format of those changes could be made a little bit more easier in terms of what we see. So I'm kind of going with this, where we have maybe 3 files that explain the 3 areas of change. Or am I wrong? Or, I mean, is this just, you know, versus just event model? I mean, what is the best storage for this thing? And like you said, there's also, I think we talked about this, when you get an event model to be quite big and it gets non-trivial, there's an idea of you know, and this is actually what we do in practice. I wanted to surround this with this.
How would you split the mirror board?
Yeah, exactly. Integration, right? I don't know. I don't have all the answers. I'm just here to share my thoughts.
Yeah. No. I mean, how did you split mirror board in one of those examples that you gave of this, you know, huge event model?
Yeah, it was by workflow, which is what I'm getting to. Right.
Okay.
So this is obviously how you divide and conquer. You don't look at the entire workflow for the entire company end to end. There's going to be areas that are, you know, more inventory based versus more payments side of things. So you know, that's kind of where we can kind of switch gears here and start talking about some different stuff that may actually be inventory things with 2 users, but one of them pays for it, so we have a payment side. But you know, your labels here, shoot, why is that so large? Oh, I see, it just does the last thing. Double clicking does the last thing you did, not text, so you have to click on text. Okay. That would be like booking, workflow, and I mean, this goes back to the original format that we started with, because they will have to have the same that structure. So if we have workflows and then we do these things, copy.
But they're not necessarily on the same. I mean, one after the other. Or...
Well, they could be. I mean,
okay,
yeah, not
yes.
necessarily. But I mean, we're talking about storing it in 2 separate files, so that I know when I have a conflict, when I'm pushing my stuff in, and I have a conflict in payment workflow.em, I guess if we call it event model, then I know that, you know, that's where I have to go look, and people are working on payment, and that's why I have conflicts there. Whereas here, you know, I have more of a, you know, I have some potential conflicts in the UI, or because people have been working in the UI, but I don't know which part of the workflow. So, you know, maybe attacking it from the perspective, okay, you're trying to merge your work in, or trying to collaborate with people. What is your merge conflict like? Certainly, having one giant event model is not going to give you a lot of, you know, I mean, Git probably will help you a lot with how you can resolve them and see different parts of the file changing. But we can probably be a little bit better in terms of the arrangement of this. So, you know, this is to be determined what we do here. That's where my mind has kind of finished. But the actual, I think the actual components inside, how you know, interpret definition of each and how you display it is pretty trivial. The interesting part is how it works with a whole bunch of people changing it and collaborating, and whether it can support collaboration where updates are, you know, flowing in, because we have to kind of study what we did in event modeling during projects at the beginning, in the middle, and maintenance. You know, in the middle, we kind of start to pull apart pieces from side to side to make sure that we, you know, include something we missed, like part of the workflow we missed. We generally, you know, move something like this, and we start to add the piece that we missed. Maybe it's, you know, we're now going to try the failure case and then continue after we resolve it. You know, that's often something that comes up. So if we're moving things left to right like this, you know, which one of these formats, if someone else is doing the same thing, and let's say on their side, you know, on their side, they, instead of grabbing those two, they grabbed these guys. And so on the one end, we have like this question mark. Does this go here or here on the, you know, on the conflict? Well, the conflict should say that, yeah, some person thinks this is happening here versus here. Or worse yet, you know, what happens when you move one of these into here, into the next one? It's like, yeah, that's actually a payment thing. That's not actually part of this. So now, does that happen too often? I don't think so. I generally think we have the swim lanes pretty well established by this point. So that's probably not it. So yeah, I don't have the answers for this, but I want you to think about, you know, what managing a project is versus source code versus requirements versus everything else as you're working together with a lot of people, how you integrate all your efforts. And the nice thing about this is that it starts to bring in the non-development efforts, and it shows that there's real conflicts within business when they say, you know, this is supposed to happen here. What we have with Miro boards and other things like that is that it forces collaboration, so you're always kind of mob programming, or at least one person's working on it, and then they publish that, what they changed to the rest, and then they can say, well, that's wrong, I'm going to edit it again. So you have, you know, an information system. I think it's really bringing to light that these organizations are just coordinating effort. The only one that we've really paid attention to is what it means on the ground floor of the actual code and the conflicts that it shows. But I think if we can bubble that up to the other levels of the organization, then we'll have a lot more to gain from quote-unquote conflict resolutions, which, you know, it seems to me now that it's a little bit irresponsible to wait until there's code conflicts to get feedback that there's workflow conflicts.
Yes.
So
it's
so if you have this in the in source control, at least you can use the mechanisms that are already built for developers, but give feedback to the rest of the organization by having this encoding in in the same set of tooling that's going to give that feedback. So yeah, I guess we can call this diagram here versioning goals for, make it a little big title here, version control of event models.
So
through each
ONote is not
stage.
going to solve this.
No, it is. Of course it is. I'm just hoping that there's an open standard that it implements, right? That can just not be something that's vendor locked to ONote. The idea is that the standard is open, but ONote gives you all these other benefits of looking at which slices are finished, maybe prioritizing them, maybe do some integration with traditional systems when people are slowly moving to this, that they can tie in Jira and other things that they have in place to the event model so that the transition's easier. You know, there's a whole bunch of things that Bobby has on the horizon and the roadmap to implement. So one of these things that I'm supposed to be doing, as I continue to talk about the beautiful benefits of using this, is to backfill it with some organization around the thought of how do we store these things, how do we version them, and I think it's kind of neat to just see if we're at different parts or different parts of the workflow. Like for example, at the beginning of a new project, you're brainstorming more about what the events are, and so do that's why I brought in the positional stuff, which may play less and less importance as we move on, because here we're just kind of brainstorming, and it's supposed to have some organizational components to make sure we know which parts we had our ideas on, and kind of organize brainstorming sessions like that. But then, once we get into something more concrete, it switches over to this. So, this is why I started to break this up, because having one giant file format for everything may not be ideal. And, that stems from, I guess, simpler structures.
But it would be nice if, so you have the brainstorming part.
Mm-hmm.
So you would add notes and, some
annotations.
Annotations and stuff.
Maybe we just call this annotation alone. That's it. Because it can have other things, not just positions. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe these are the events that are. So in the second step, you would then lay them out. So, but you wouldn't want to, to type the whole thing again.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, there's no problem with keeping these around if they have positional stuff. You probably would have maybe some notes, like this is future ideas or whatever that we don't want to remove. But as you move into more concrete things, these still exist, but they just might be filtered out or not used or overridden because we have connections now. So whatever annotations there were, like if you were to get rid of the connections, or to flip a filter to get rid of the connections, it would fly back to how they were put on the board in the first place according to these annotation files. So I think we can do both, satisfy both criteria. But yeah, I think that would be that would kind of work. Anyway, the thing in my mind was just, do we lose a lot? I mean, maybe we do start with one file format like this, where we start to do these things, and maybe we even have a definition part at the top like you were talking about. Maybe we do have everything defined, such as read models at the top. So read model.
Wouldn't this be then like the brainstorming part?
Yeah, you could still embed brainstorming part in here. You simply would have a whole bunch of events, but because there's um, no commands interspersed in them, you would have maybe an annotation section at the bottom. So how does this single file format look like for the very first part? I guess you would have annotate event or task added with a position, right? 19 comma 3 or 200, right?
Grid or something.
I don't know. There might be a size or whatever else that you could add, but let's just start with position, and that we assume that it fits a default, rectangle size, and that's it. Does it really matter where this would be? I mean, do we keep all the annotations at the end, or is it okay just to put it right next to the event? If we start to find that we have screens, commands, and events, then just the interpretation of this format now starts to place them one below the other like this,
I mean, if you at the end get the graph.
Well, that's the thing. You can imply the graph from this because we're doing something implicit. If I put down screen, command, event, read model, screen, it means I have a screen being shown, then I have another screen being shown, meaning maybe I pressed a menu button to change the screen, and then I click the button because I have a command. So I can infer quite a lot from this. If the screen has two buttons.
The order matters.
What's that?
Then the order matters.
Yeah, I think in this case it does. And the reason I wanted, going back to my original point, the order matters here because it's a timeline, right? That's the benefit of an event model, is a timeline, so there's linearity to this. And the advantage of having a file is that there is, that opinion that a file is linear. As you go further in the file, you're further along. So same thing here. Whereas I think if you, look at other formats, they may move things around. I mean, even programming languages, you have places where it doesn't matter where you define the function. Earlier on, you had to define the functions first before you call them because the compilers were optimized for that type of thing. I don't think that's so much the case anymore for most part. So this, we could look at this and say, if I have screens, commands, events, and read models, that it's got some opinion, and then maybe if we have just screens and events intertwined, that means we have the rapid event modeling version where we skip the integration layer, and we just look at what is the timeline of seeing different UI pieces, etc. We also need to define that it's a certain user's screen, right? User Joe, and if we start to do things like that, we can start to imply that we have some rows to put them in. Maybe if it's empty, that implies that it's the same row as the previous one of that instance. For example, there's some high affinity if you only have one admin UI swim lane, it's the administrator. So any instance of the screen that only the administrator can see should always be there. So, do we make this really rigid and always fill in information by the tooling, or do we make it really open and push the tooling to make the proper judgments of what to display and how to interpret it? And also, like, once this is brought in to actually generate code, what does it do? But yeah, lots of interesting. And I'm no expert on open formats of how things get encoded, but I kind of seen what the online Wordly Maps uses and some other notations for encoding maps versus graphs versus something else. And we can start there. Maybe there's some experts out there that can say, the important parts of an event model are X, Y, and Z, and therefore you should use this type of format. You probably don't want to split it into multiple files, or maybe you do, but maybe someone that's watching can at least point me to, or point us to someone that can help us with this. But yeah, I certainly think that updating this from the graphical side is the number one thing, is that we're using something that's approachable. I'm not going to tell business people to go and edit these files, that's for sure. But I also want the maybe for the sake of merge conflicts and being able to resolve what changed, maybe you do want to be explicit about some of these things. Whereas I said you have to be implicit, because if you're explicit, then version control can do its thing and show you that there is a difference. Like if you just leave it for implementation, you might not get a merge conflict, but all of a sudden the event will jump into a different lane once things sync up, and it's gonna be like, well, why is that there? Maybe that's okay. Maybe then you correct it, and then the explicit value gets put in. Yeah, lots of options.
Yes, and also if the encoding is explicit, then it's maybe easier to implement tools. Because if you have all those implicit rules that are maybe also
I agree,
some kind of interpretation, and then you have different implementations of
you would then have you'd have a lot more work to say that this is an event modeling compliant tool because it does X, Y, and Z. And then you'd have to have a specification for the tooling, not just for the format, which is not good. So again, too many things to balance. So if we come up with this, maybe you're right. Maybe we start with this explicitness, and maybe we start to relax the rules for how they're defined. But I know that if Rick was here this week, he'd have a lot of opinions on this. But maybe he'll catch up on the recording and join us next week for it. So yeah, I don't know. What's your take on this?
So this is explicit. If you have this screen instance user Joe, that user Joe is the actor, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I don't have that on the graph. I guess I should put it on there.
So if it's explicit, then you would see, like, if somebody changes something, that screen goes to a different actor, then version control would pick up on that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if it's explicit, you would. And then if it wasn't, you'd have some. One tool would show you one thing versus another. And you'd have a lot more explaining to do about the conventions and things like that. So maybe we start with that, and then see if there's some shorthand. We can always have a spec version too, and it doesn't hurt to start with a more explicit one, and then realize that we are over specifying, and we can go to a V2, which may be backwards compatible. We just throw away some of those things when we read a V1 of that spec. I don't know. I do like the fact that we can be quite deliberate about exactly what we want in here at this point. And I think we have 3 years of heavy use of this now. Specifically this type of format. 2018 is when we made the decisions to have some of these opinions in here because they were helping. And so now I think is the time to do it. I think it would have been a little bit premature to do it earlier, but I think now I'm happy.
What could also help is someone who really knows Git and merge conflicts, and
I don't know anyone like that.
So, I mean, if you, for example, if you keep the stuff less explicit, and you have a timeline, and then you get, an addition between, screen instance 1 and screen instance task 2.
Yeah.
That can maybe change the model,
Mm-hmm.
but it wouldn't be a conflict. It's you add something in between.
Yeah.
But it has maybe a big implication.
It does. I mean, you look at Git and the context around a change. Like you can start to tweak Git to look at how many contextual lines it will use in and around a change, whether you use 1 or 2 lines, etc. So I've always talked about over the years of Git whether trailing, whether you put your braces on the same line as the definition versus getting an extra one, KNR format for code. You start to get differences in how many conflicts you get, how they get automatically resolved or not, or whether you want them to be automatically resolved or not, depending on what you grab. So I was always against the A&D format that Microsoft pushed brace languages to through C# and wanted to stick with the Java side and C side of where the braces go. And people say white space, more readability. I'm like, but then now you have to tweak your tools to have more context lines, and yeah. Anyway, I don't think there's a problem here because we're not going to have a braces type language, I don't think. Although maybe I think people are pushing for JSON for this to be, put in, but I certainly don't want to be typing a whole bunch of quotes and commas and indents and braces. I think that's going to be not
You
helpful.
could always use YAML.
Oh, jeez. I guess.
I don't know what's better.
If I want it to be
Braces or
controversial, I
spaces?
think that'll be really good. Maybe we should go with YAML just to get people upset as they go and see what we're doing. Funny enough, I worked at a company where the YAML guy also worked on part-time, but he's based in Seattle. Really smart guy. Before command line GitHub tools were written by GitHub folks, he wrote an entire GitHub CLI tool long before they were even thinking about it, and we were using that. I forget what it's called, but it was around for a while. But yeah, he was the author of YAML, so very smart guy. So for all the YAML complaints out there, you should probably talk to him. I don't know. See what the motivation was for YAML.
I mean, get rid of the braces.
Yeah. Yeah. At the expense of what? So, I don't know.
Just do Markdown.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly, I don't care as long as we meet our objectives of having something that we can collaborate on for event modeling, and then if that is stored along with our projects, I think we all win. Maybe there'll be an extension added to Miro that will plunk it into this environment that people are happy with, and then any positional changes are going to be interpreted, whether it's just slightly left or right of something. It'll adjust this format for where it's supposed to go, and should work if you load up the same Miro board. But if someone loads up just the file in their brand new Miro, it might have the spacing off a little bit more, and unless they're in this initial part where we actually save the actual positions. Anyway, we'll see. Well, that's good. So today we got a lot of things done that we wanted to do in the meetup. We quickly tied up just how easy the lookup read models are in the previous topic. So going back here just to tie up, if there's any questions about this other topic we were talking about, if I can find it. Ooh, so many things on here now. Is it here?
It's down, right? Down, with the green arrow, yellow arrow.
Ah,
the
right
big
here.
one.
Yes, I got it.
Break.
Yeah. This part here where we can make a much simpler blue-green deploy with these read models being very opinionated about what each row stands for. So I think that makes it a lot easier. Just in time, just in time fixing of these issues that you may have versus this batched or staggered adjustments. I really don't like how large this side of the
You would need to go and select the whole mirror board. And
I don't want to do that. Yeah, I don't want to do that.
Or maybe you can send them an email. They can do it.
I don't know. Is it worth it even at this point? There's so much here. Yeah, maybe. Maybe I'll just sit down one day and highlight things and move them over.
Maybe
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, regarding tombstoning and snapshotting. Like tombstone event, that's a new initial event for a stream, right?
Yes, as an initial event for a stream.
And when we do snapshot, is that actual event on the event stream, or we keep a snapshot aside?
It's up to you. Some people keep them aside. Actually, a lot of people keep them aside. So there's a reference there as to how far you have to go back, and then you would only query your event store up to whatever event that you had referenced in the aside. So there's definitely a camp of people that want to have the event store as pure as possible, because a snapshot doesn't really offer any new information about the business and the state transitions in the business. So in a lot of ways it doesn't belong. That obviously goes out the window when you're doing tombstones, because there you actually bubble up this concern of data management to be a business concern, and therefore you have brand new entities that you just retire the old ones, start new ones with whatever projection of state that you think is good enough for the new entity that you're going to start using from then on. But yeah, I've heard of both. I know that the initial implementations out there of snapshots put the events in the event store.
Yeah, I'm asking because yesterday I was thinking about it, so I'm at the point where I need to do some snapshots of my event streams. So,
yeah, I think I'm of the opinion of keeping it separate. Some other infrastructure. A quick lookup of do you have a snapshot of this thing, and if that snapshot exists, then you probably have a number there that tells you how far to go back, and then
you skip those.
Then you skip back down to only that part and play everything back from that point and so on. So yeah. Good luck with that one.
Maybe I know, stupid question. How do you know which ID of the entity you should use as the new card?
Yeah, it would be in your read models, right? So the whole CQRS lifecycle, your read model would capture what your entity, if these are rows in a database, right? Sorry, they're not rows in your database. This is like an ID of your stream. Your stream ID would be in your read model, and that would basically allow you to query the right thing. So if I go to my cart, I need to have a reference to it. Even if I have one, like where is the, like if I have one, how do I find this ID? I'm not going to query event store for the IDs, right? How I have to have some materialized view of what my cart ID is.
For the
Because
user, yes.
So
I mean, for who? The customer.
yeah, exactly. So you're always going to start with some projection of a lookup table. Here are the users and their carts. It's just another projection, and your workflow is going to start that way by saying, this is user X. We need to add something to their cart. So get the stream. That stream ID is in that lookup, in that read model. You know, that's what you do for when you create your command. Your command would now have ID of that cart. Add this item. You'd throw it into your right side of CQRS, and there it would hydrate the proper entity based on the ID thrown in with that command. If it checks out OK, stores another event, and that event gets subscribed to, and I guess the total in your cart gets updated on that read model, and that screen shows what it's supposed to show. So yeah, it's kind of neat to go through these things, because if you realize that this is just another case of this, where we just change the cart reference to exactly how we started this line of thinking in this one single stream ID. It's no different. We just have to say that we're not using that filing cabinet anymore. We're using this one because those are records from last year's taxes. I don't have space for that cabinet in the office right now, so you need to know that the new organization of that filing cabinet, what it is, that these records exist maybe in other sections or whatever. So, but yeah, that's good questions. Always pleasure to catch up on these interesting topics. So I hope next week we have maybe I'll have a chance to talk with Bobby a bit and go through this and get some initial file formats tested out, and see how we can add all this to version control and replace needing to use Miro and coordinate yet another thing, because now we have your ticket tracking, and you have your source code control, and now you have these diagrams, and it's actually worse out there. Usually you have some sort of a shared OneDrive or something, or Dropbox with a ton of folders and shared millions of diagrams and other things that people never keep up to date. So it's a lot worse than just 3 places. It's physically maybe 3 places, but even logically there's even more places. So we're really far away from a blueprint for our system, and this way we'll get it back to being more of a blueprint. Okay, well that's it for, I'm just going to double check our chat here, but I think I am running out of time. Michael, Greg, they're still timely relevant. Yeah, of course, Michael, so the Greg's course is still timely, and all of that. Those concepts haven't changed. They're as old as time. Event sourcing is not something that Greg came up with. He used it a lot in CQRS, but CQRS per se is just making a separate write side versus a read side, and is really about multiple models rather than event sourcing. You can have a CQRS system without event sourcing. There's definitely been a big push for that at some point 5 years ago or 6 years ago, where all these things about having to hydrate and all that was seen as overly complex, even though it's better. But people have done that before. And ONote, I forget the format it's using, but I think it is JSON from what I know. But it's up to, it still can be changed. I think Bobby wants to keep backwards compatibility, so whatever engine is used right now to deserialize those things, if it's JSON, it'll still be supported, but we'll see. I'm more concerned about these an open standard that can be more easily interrogated, examined, and implemented by lots of people out there.
Is ONode open source?
The format will be, ONode itself is a SaaS model, just like Miro, but with more affordable pricing, because as I said, Miro is extremely expensive once you start to collaborate across an organization. And for us, it's even more expensive, as we have to not just collaborate across ourselves with each other, but within each of our clients. So it gets extremely expensive because we're taking on the load of that, and until a client starts to get their own what's it called, account with Miro, then we're on the hook for that. And then there's a problem with the format, because Miro really wants it to be sticky to one particular client. They don't want your drawing to be easily shared and transferred, because they're going to lose out on a lot of licensing money. So they make it extremely hard to share your effort across to another company. So as a we're a consultancy and we do development for other companies. To move that around is not fun. There's always something that's a pain in the butt about it, and I can't wait personally to have ONode, because that's going to go away. The pricing is going to go away. We're going to have an open standard that's better than just these maps. It's more of a graph once you get into a proper structure, where you can do better analysis, and you use it for way more functions than you would what you get with Miro right now. So there's a huge opportunity to improve immensely here, and it's not going to be done with a general purpose tool. Miro is a general purpose tool for diagramming. It was called real-time whiteboard, right? Before it got called Miro. Yeah. And so that's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a real-time whiteboard, and event modeling is a blueprint. It's not a whiteboard. There's a difference between a blueprint and a whiteboard. So yeah, I can't wait. But anyway, it's been 2 hours now. So thank you so much, everyone. If there's any other last questions, I'll answer them. But last one. No? Okay. Well, have a wonderful weekend. And I hope to see you next week. I might do a live coding thing just for fun, if you want to look at it on Saturday, when I maybe I'll have time. I know I got to clean up my office and other things, but we'll see what I can do. Look out for an announcement if I go live. It'll probably be on YouTube, and you can join in and look at what I'm up to. I don't expect too many participants, maybe 1 or 2, 3 people that are interested. But anyway, have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you every Friday. Hopefully next Friday you'll be here, and again, have a good night and good weekend. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Have a great weekend.